Mary, my beautiful mother. Unknown to me at that time, I had sown the seeds of my greatest glory and also of my inevitable crucifixion by men. To both my rise to glory and my greatest trial, my mother, Mary, contributed her fair share. Even as I stood before the brothers in the assembly hall of the Essenes of Nazar, her training and her personality were part of my being and gave rise to much of my surprising knowledge. From my mother, I imbibed many things, including an impatience with the stupidity of the Jews, a belief that they were destroying their own religion and country, a restless verbal drive that relentlessly drove home my convictions in the face of opposition, and a sharp and agile mind coupled with a memory that was extraordinary and detailed. Yes, the strong hands and the strong opinions of my mother had been with me in that ordeal. Ordeal it was, and yet it was an experience of singular bliss. From it also I was to realize two things, both expanded and proved later. The first was that, under stress, I could rise in a sort of physical mental scale of octaves. It was something like a feeling of an emotion or an excitement that lifted me to an unbelievable pitch. In this high state, I seemed to come into a strange harmony with the universe, and to be able to tap into limitless knowledge and to see clearly things that I could not know of my own personal experience. The second thing I found was not so pleasant. This mood or feeling seemed to require an enormous amount of energy to sustain it even. For a short time. When the mood or feeling left me, I was always ravenously hungry and also exhausted. It was as if my vital energy could be called up to perform the unbelievable, but it then left me depleted and completely without energy. The feeling or mood itself was filled with amazing pleasure. When it was upon me, I felt as if completely isolated and sufficient unto myself, as if I were a superman with a superintelligence. But it was also like expanding or floating in space and arriving at an abstract bliss in which there was no sensation or effort. It was gracious to feel and glorious to experience. When in that exalted condition, I could see with amazing acuity and observe infinite detail, and in later experiences found that I could seem to be in more than one place at a time. My mind seemed to be separated into strange physical aspects so that I could see my surroundings, places distant, and also things not purely of the physical world. Yes, all this was accompanied by that indescribable and blissful feeling of languor into which any man might long to escape from the trials of the physical world. Always, following hard upon the blissful period of ecstasy, there was that brutal and punishing hunger and exhaustion. It had the effect of clamping a hood of black upon the rioting colors of mind. It seemed to crowd my mind into dark crevices, so that even the light that reached my eyes could hardly register, and all was seen through a veil darkly. I seemed to be suddenly unworthy even to live, and to be enveloped in a black despair. Do not know how I got home after falling asleep in the lapse of 2 high priests at the assembly hall of Essenes of Nazar, but I was awakened for our evening meal. I stumbled to the table and could barely hold my heavy, listless body up to eat. James, a year younger than I, sat and ate with dignity and that tidy carefulness which mother trained into all her children. I felt depressed, useless, as if a great weight was in every cell of my body and as if my mind would not function. Even though I was ravenous, I could hardly lift a lamb stew and goat milk curds to my mouth, and food in which I usually delighted tasted as if filled with straw. Yet I could not get enough to satisfy my craving. My mother was tense, critical, and tearful as she moved in her kitchen, over which she usually presided with such calm and serene delight. Look at Jeshua now. I told you it would be too much for him. He can. Hardly move you expect him to carry on his studies at the temple, and also at the Brotherhood? He's too young. I tell you, he cannot do it. Her tone was sharp, her features drawn. My father answered in his kindly voice, Beloved, he is lethargic. I know the feeling. It comes from excessive mental effort of a special kind. He will not normally experience such an energy drain as today, and certainly not in the training of the Brotherhood. He will continue to go to the temple for training on the Sabbath and 2 other days in the mornings only. He will train at the Brotherhood the other days of the week. Do you expect one so tiny to be in school all the time? No, only from sunrise to sunset, 4 days a week. He is so tired. How can... What will they teach him? what he is asked to learn, and more. What, Joseph? Exactly what will they teach my son? Even in my lethargy, I could feel the tension in her almost hysterical insistence, and my stomach knotted at her distress. But my father laughed in his pleasant way. "Ah, when you take the oath, I will tell you, Mary." "Oath?" That was all she said, but her tone made it clear how she felt. There was a long silence, but I could see the stubborn set to her chin. Detached as I was, possibly because I was physically unable to participate in the emotional tensions of the moment, I detected that strange something in the behavior of my mother that caused me to worry and to wonder. It was as if she resented Joseph's interest and his influence over me and my destiny. In the years to come, I felt that she thought he should be an outsider in the intimate relations between the two of us. This night, in a dim way, I began to notice this, but of course at that time, and for years, could not understand its meaning. But I suffered for and with my beautiful mother. She seemed to be caught in some emotional trap which she could not speak about to me, and from which she could not free herself, or even ask help from God or man. I loved my mother, and it hurt me that she was not happy with my father and me, but knew that I wanted those studies in the brotherhood with the very strength of my life, and was certain that my father had made up his mind that I should have them right away. Yet he never spoke quickly or forced his will upon my mother. He won point by point over all her logic, and persuaded her from her purely emotional stand by gentle laughter and loving firmness. When it was right for all concerned, he could not be swerved from his decision, and eventually she yielded. Yet as the years went by and my studies raised me to understand how truly great my father was, I wondered that she could, for one moment, oppose his divine will. I was excused from the table and took my dessert of 3 dates to my pallet with me, but I was too tired to stay awake and eat them. Once, much later, I roused to hear my mother's fierce whisper from her camel's hair padded bed in the far corner. "You know who his father is?" "Joseph?" And I was reassured by Joseph's patient and sleepy answer. "Joseph Bar Joseph is the firstborn son of an adoring father." Ah, Joseph! The anguish of her soul and bitterness of her life seemed to be twisted into those 2 words, and I felt a pity for my troubled mother, a pity that I could not understand but which lay around my heart with fear. "He hasn't the strength for such an ordeal." She whispered it, but now even she was sounding a little sleepy, I thought. "Beloved, today he answered questions that only an 18-year-old should answer. In the normal school, he will gain strength along with his knowledge. More important, he will gain his life's work and inner peace." "I know what his life's work is to be, and so do you. Have you told him?" "You know I cannot. Not yet for years." "Then is it not best that we help him go the way he wishes now?" The poor child. Such destiny, the only hope for our nation. Sobbing, her words were lost, and I was too tired to listen or finish chewing the date in my mouth. I swallowed hard and dropped into sound sleep, from which my mother's gentle but strong hand awakened me. She bent and kissed my cheek and pushed the hair up from my forehead, and I smelled the fragrance of blossoms that was always about her. My mother's ovoes were large and deep blue in color, but in the early morning light they looked purple and seemed to be filled with flecks of fire, like a cooking fire reflecting from the top of a goblet of grape juice. Her skin was so fair it was whiter than the linen she wore or the scarf which kept tidy her soft, curly, light brown hair. Later, when my learning was great enough, I realized that she could have been a direct descendant of the Nordic strain that came into Egypt through the conquered Mitannic tribes. As she bent over me, her lovely face showing her concern, I felt a great tenderness for her, even though I could not understand the cause of her strange actions. I put my arms around her to comfort her. My son, too soon you are a man." Father was moving about the kitchen area, and I could smell the brewing mulberry leaves from which he made a savory drink, and the bread baking on the top stones of the oven hearth, but my mother did not seem in a hurry to release me, and clung to me with a fierceness that was new to her. Usually she was quick to start to teach me numbers or words or sentences which she had memorized from the temple work given her by the priests of the family, for she was the eldest daughter and the 3rd child of Levi, youngest brother of Zacharias. In these training sessions she often said to me over and over in Aramaic, Greek, or Latin, "You are the hope of the world." She whispered this to me on this morning, but did not let me repeat the words before she added, "You are the only hope of the Jews." I held her tightly, for she seemed to need the feel of my arms, and I whispered back, "I will study hard, Mother. I will be worthy." I think she started and gasped. She pulled back and looked hard at me and long into my eyes. Then, without a word, she handed me another clean robe, fastened at the waist with a bright blue cord. My sandals were dropped to the floor from the third shelf of the rosewood and cedar wardrobe. My mother was tidy and neat, and her house was always in perfect order. The stone floors and the stones of the cooking fire and oven were washed the afternoon before each Sabbath. The 3 rooms of the house were swept daily. No food dropped on the floor was allowed to stay, and she would not permit goats to come into the house, as did our neighbors. Even tiny lambs had to be kept outside in shelter. She walked to the distant stream daily to wash clothes during all the years when her family was growing, and daily also she went with a tall pitcher of Grecian design to the fresh water well at the edge of the compound. Here, as was the custom of her day, she met all of her friends and neighbors and chatted with them. It was at this well, over the years, I heard my mother's innermost convictions poured out in debate with woman and with man. Years later, I was to realize that my pretty mother was politically minded, and, since she could not debate in the square or at the temple, which were the strongholds of men, she turned the village well into a debating place. There, in her woman's realm, she took on and defeated many wise men and spread her own political thinking throughout the village, and finally throughout the central part of Galilee. Mother had been raised in a family of high priests, and from her infancy, had heard the facts of political and social changes and the personalities and causes behind them. In her beautiful head, she had a mind as keen and as retentive as any man, even my father, and in her small body she had a heart that would have fitted any lion of Judah. Nothing would have pleased her more than to have organized an army to sweep against that injustice which she called Roman tyranny and tax. Standing in her tidy robe, small and fair, she seemed an easy match for any man. As her fame spread, important men came to meet her challenge at the well and went away convinced. Sometimes she made enemies, men who tried to silence her by pressure from the authorities because they thought she was too outspoken in her opinions. But she would never back down, and once defied an overly officious centurion. My mother's political interest came out of her family and also out of the times. Many times I heard her use history to prove her point and say such things as, "My grandfather was 20 when Pompey came as the pretended peacemaker between the Maccabean lines, but he turned conqueror and made our land a vassal of Rome, destroying the religious and the political liberties the Jews fought and died for under Mattathias Maccabee. The Roman power overthrew the independent Jewish national 63 years before I, Jeshua, was born, 37 years before I was born, when Mother was yet 20 years in the future of births. The unspeakably cruel Herod was made king of Judea by the Roman Senate, 3 years later and 17 years. Before my mother's birth, Herod had conquered Galilee and, after a long siege, had recaptured the sacred city of Jerusalem. One of my mother's adversaries shouted in his wrath, "Herod the Great was a zealous builder. He built amphitheaters in the royal palace, forts, castles, and magnificent cities. He built Caesarea in Samaria from sand dunes of the sea. He even rebuilt the citadel of the temple." "He was a builder indeed," said my mother. "He built a licentious passion for 10 wives, and into his flesh he built the loathsome disease of which he died. In his last days he built a hell upon earth by slaying Antipater, Alexander, and Aristobulus. And then, not satisfied with killing these sons, he also ordered the murder of his wife Mariamne. He ordered a new bath for himself at Calero, east of the Jordan. But even the healing waters could not save him. The only things he did not destroy in his life were the palm trees of Jericho, under which he retired and died on April 5th, AUC 750. That was 3 years ago. You remember the dates too well." My dear, beautiful mother pulled herself up to her tiny height and placed her hand upon my head. "I should remember, for your great builder has built himself an eternal condemnation by ordering the destruction of all male children born in Bethlehem in the year of Jeshua's birth. We had to take the child to Egypt for 7 months and dared not return until that great Roman died. The tax of Rome is nominal, and we are allowed religious freedom, one debater challenged. My mother's eaves flamed like two blue lances. True, each tax is nominal, but the poll tax and the property tax are not all. The right to levy import taxes is sold to the publicans, yet we must pay all of these taxes even if we cannot find wherewithal to buy food. I say any tax is a shame upon our history, and of course, we have religious freedom. That is why our high priests of our temples must go and ask our Roman conquerors for the use of the Jewish sacred robes when we want to hold a religious service. Have we freedom because they do not tell us what to believe and when to go to worship, when we cannot hold a service without begging for the vestments of our priests? Have we religious freedom? But that is necessary so they can be certain there will be no priests led to revolt, sponsored by the Levites. Oh, I see. Even as it was necessary to slay all the innocent children born in Bethlehem to prevent the rising of the King of the Jews. With this, my mother stooped and hugged and caressed me. The many times I heard her use this argument, I never knew her to fail to turn to me with adoration and caresses. In my mother's opinion, the very bad political situation in which conquerors strutted over the provinces and controlled the ritual vestments of the Levites was not as bad as other conditions of the times. Many times, when the long shadows of evening brought the cooling shadows to the heated arguments of the well, she would say something like this: "The fate of the Jews lies not within the hands of the tax-eating Romans, but within the hearts of the Jewish people. We are all fools, weaklings, and idiots. We have forgotten and deny the brotherhood of man and the service of God, which made our people great and could make us great even in these days. We fight each other over trivial ritual matters. This is our ruination. It is the touch of a loathsome disease which will burn our country's body and destroy our people as a nation. Through history, have our prophets and priests not said that our only salvation is in unity? Have they not warned us that the temple shall be destroyed and the people scattered when factions and disobedience arise? What are these great differences? Have not both modes of thinking been with us since the return from Babylon? Verily, the Hasidim, that is to say, the pious, who returned from the exile, set themselves too firmly against all heathens and all laxities in the enforcement of the Levitical laws, and they deserve to be called the Perushim, meaning the separate ones, in derision out of which grew the term Pharisees. The opponents naturally retorted that they were satisfied to be merely the Tzaddikim, that is to say, the righteous, and out of this grew the Sadducees. These have over the years become the ruling Jews of the church, the high priests, and the higher class of society. What if the Sadducees deny the resurrection of the dead and deny that there is reward or punishment after death? Are there not items in the belief of the Pharisees that are just as imponderable? Do not the Pharisees insist upon an angel or archangel for every hair of the head? Do they not insist upon an ascending scale of their Levitical purity, that is to say, separation from all that is profane or even sensible? Is not the chaber, the highest of their 4 degrees of purity, the associate of their organization, a synonym for one too pure and too punctilious? To them, has not the written law been insufficient to guide the daily conduct of man? Have they not over the years expanded and made comments and expositions upon the law which is known now as the oral law, or the traditions of the elders? Has this not in turn given rise to the conceited, arrogant scribes who have made a vocation of copying the written law, teaching and mouthing it, and also learning the oral law so that they can spew it into the minds of the younger generation? Are these supercilious scribes not a guild within the party of the Pharisees? Proud and boastful because their learning has brought them honor, and because they are usually called up to deliver the discourse in the synagogues of our people. Are not almost all Pharisees hypocrites, lacking humble and God-fearing men who are not puffed up because they are pure? The Zealots, another party within the ranks of the Pharisees, has risen within the last 40 years. They grew under the rule of Herod, the so-called Great. They would use force and the sword to bring about the reign of the Messiah, for whom we all wait. They, and they only to my mind, make complete sense. They are constant to their watch cry, "We will recognize no Lord but Jehovah. We will pay no tax but to the temple. We will have no friend but a zealot. Given time, they may save our poor nation." But unless they do, the the Pharisees, the scribes, and the Sadducees, will kill our nation with stupid rivalries that have no just cause. They will bring ruin upon our people, pulverize our temple, and spread our believers through the entire world to have no place of their own for a time and a time. Often we would walk back through the warm night from the well, and my mother would be transported into an ecstatic daze. And as my years of maturity approached, her influence had spread across the land until learned men came to sit and hear her. In my earlier days, they came merely to bait and bother her, and she was often able to change the opinion of man and was proud when she could do so. She knew, as did all the people of my time, that the Jews were facing desperate days unless they changed their hypocritical insistence upon the Levitical laws. She always hoped that the zealots would help her put forth the true Messiah. "You expect the Savior of the Jews to be born just in the nick of time? That is a belief in miracles," one rabbi taunted her. "I do not believe in miracles, learned rabbi. I know they exist. Have I told you the story of my uncle, the ancient and venerable priest Zacharias, and his beloved wife of 50 years, the childless Elizabeth?" Of course she had not, and this was indeed one of her favorite tales, and it never failed to impress. So many times did I hear it that I had it memorized before I was 6, though for many years I thought it was just a story of her fondest imagining. But this indeed was the story of a miracle. I tell it here with all her delightful and picturesque embellishments. This miracle began in the first week of October, 748 AUC, and my uncle had passed his 60th birthday in the service of the temple as a priest. This morning he had been selected from the priestly course of Abia as superintending priest. He was to be honored with the office of incensing on the golden altar of incense, glowing red with coals, very near to the heavy veil which hung before the Holy of Holies. Since he was a priest and not of the Levites, he had come from his home in the south country in the hills of Judea, for he did not live in the awful quarter of Jerusalem, nor yet in Jericho. And all of us who knew him were proud, for his kindness and love were known in every mind and every heart. Where Zacharias stood, we knew God was present. We waited without the temple gate until the 3 blasts of the silver trumpet wakened the city to life and began the morning sacrifice. With the massive gate of the temple opening with the first light, for the priest on watch from the highest peak of the temple had signaled the first light sign, and those who had been washed and purified according to the ordinances were in the priestly course under the direction of my beloved uncle. He had made the inspection of the priests in the courts of the temple and had cast the lots to select the course of priests in the hall of hewn and polished stones. All was in readiness, and we who loved him were great in the congregation, even before the organs of the temple summoned us all to service. How glorious he looked as the celebrant priest, bearing the golden censer, standing alone within the holy place and lit by the glow of the 7 lights of the candelabra. How glorious indeed were the robes of his office, and to the left of the altar was the table of the shewbread. To his left, that is the right or south side of the altar, shining with beauty, was the golden candlestick. How serene and confident he looked as he stood waiting for the special signal to spread the incense on the altar. The priests of the course and people had withdrawn in reverence and were prostrated before the altar of the Lord, offering their unspoken adoration. Zacharias saw the incense kindled and was about to prostrate himself in worship and then withdraw, but he stopped, and his eyes were fixed upon the right or south side of the altar and between it and the golden candlestick. He suddenly stopped and stood half-crouched, but absolutely transfixed by what he saw. It was clear that he was troubled in his mind, and that a great awe fell upon him. Thus standing, he was unmoving while the prayers of the people were offered, and our gaze was fixed upon the still form of beloved Zacharias. How great was our expectation and our dread as he at last turned and moved forward as one who walks in his sleep, to stand at the top of the steps which led from the porch of the altar to the court of the priests. For standing thus, as was the tradition, he was to lead in the priestly benediction which was given unto Moses thusly: "The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his eyes to you and give you peace." But this benediction, which is spoken daily in the temple before the meat offering, he could not speak, though his neck strained, his jaws worked, and his eyes rolled with strain. nor could he lead in the chant of psalms of praise, and there were no words to accompany the joyous sound of music as the drink offering was poured out. All the priests and then the people realized that something of marvelous power had been shown to him in the sanctuary. He tried to show by signs that he could not speak, nor could he speak for 9 months thereafter, for he had seen the awesome form of a most beautiful angel who spoke to his ears only and was visible to his eyes only. And the angel had said to my uncle, "Zacharias, show no fear before me, but know that the barren wife of your youth, though now weighted with years, shall conceive and bear a son. And when her time is come, you shall call his name Jehochanan, that is to say, the Lord is gracious. Great shall be the joy and gladness, for he shall be filled with the power of God, even from his mother's womb. He shall drink neither wine nor strong drink, but shall lead the way wherein many of the children of Israel shall return to the Lord God. He shall have the power of prophecy, and shall turn the hearts of fathers to children, and make the disobedient understand wisdom." But Uncle Zacharias was fearful and asked for signs that this miracle was indeed from God. "I am Gabriel," the angel said. "I am sent from the presence of God to speak to you and bring you glad tidings. And the sign of my justice shall be this: you shall be unable to speak from this instant until the day that all these things are performed, and you shall know this is all from God." And when Aunt Elizabeth was delivered of her son, her friends would have called him Zacharias after the father, but she would not so name him. When Uncle Zacharias was asked what name he chose, he took a slate and wrote the name that the angel had given, and the dumbness fell from his lips. His first words were, "Indeed, the name shall be Jehochanan, that is to say, John." Such is the power of God and the miracles he can and has delivered to save our nation and the Jews. But an even greater miracle occurred during the 6th month of my aunt's pregnancy, a miracle that shall be told in due season. Always, when she reached this point, my mother's eyes were upon me as if she spoke of something hidden that I should understand. From a very early age, I was made to expect some marvelous thing that she would relate. In a time, she would often say to me when I asked her to tell of the great miracle, "Wait a time with patience, for the story is meant for grown men and is not meant for the very young." Such was my beautiful mother, strong, wise, clever, yet as tender at heart as should be the priestess of a temple. For no woman was ill or in labor but that my mother was there, her strong hands and her keen mind soothing away pain. Thus, through the years, all Nazareth, as our village came be called, adored, respected, loved, and admired my mother. And what she spoke was believed, and what she suggested was done, for she was a power and a treasure such as walks seldom upon the face of the earth. After she had hugged me and caressed me, my beautiful mother went into the room with the kitchen fires and left me to pull on and tie my sandals. I combed out my knotted auburn locks with a tortoiseshell no redder than they. Then, before I hurried outside to wash my face and hands, ears and neck in the stone basin at the right of the doorway, I looked closely at my family, for I loved them dearly. I adored the sight of my beautiful mother playing with my brothers and sisters while she bathed them. It was all the more pleasing when she and my father laughed and played with us all, and glorious indeed when they joined in singing joyous or religious songs. My mother singing in her sweet, clear soprano, holding Mary Beth, that is to say, Mary Elizabeth, named for my mother and her aunt, mother of Jehochanan. Mary Beth was the youngest at the time I went forth to the compound of the Nazar Essenes, and she was then not a year old. My father would cradle Jojo, that is Joses, who was a year older than Mary Beth, on his breast, and bounce Jim, as we called James, upon his lanky knee. But I was a whole year older than Jim and stood upon my own, loving each one with an intensity and a passion that hurt my small breast. Though I have written of my family at the time when I went forth to the assembly hall, in later years the scene was even more joyous and loving. For Simon, whom we nicknamed Zim, and the people about called Simon of Nazar. I know not if this was for the village or street upon which we lived. Simon was born 2½ years after Mary Beth, and a full 2 years before Dada, which was our loving name for Judah, the 5th son of my parents. The second daughter and the seventh child was 11 1/2 years younger than I. She was named after mother and my grandmother and was called Mary Anna. We loved her very much and called her Mary A to fit with Mary B for Mary Beth. My youngest sister, who was born when I was 17 and away in Britain, was called Mary J, or sometimes merely Ine, for her name was Mary Josephine, and she was named for my mother and my father. This morning I tiptoed to the rawhide cot, over which a mattress of grass was laid and on which Jim Jim slept so soundly. I touched his flaxen hair and was surprised that his lively blue eyes did not open in his smiling face. But he slept on, and I turned to the hand-hewn rocking crib which held Jojo. He lay with his head pushed against the upper slat and his rear raised above the coverlet and leaned far over against the side of the crib. And I smiled to myself that he could sleep thus on his neck and knees, and him that yet sleeps so soundly. I touched gently and whispered my love for and for all this house, for I knew I was going forth into a world of men of purpose, and was leaving behind my hours of sunny childhood and aimless play.